Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias. Okay, this is a follow-up to a comment made on my video on Rough Ryders Medium Toothpicks, part 1. And in there, Slick Slicers, Eric from Slick Slicers, as well as Steve Smith, both commented that their classic carbon toothpick from Rough Ryder had warped blades. I think Eric said he had 3 of them that had warped blades, and Steve Smith said that both of his had warped blades. I've also got 2 left. I sent Eric one. Eric said that the one I sent him had was at least manageable. And so I took a look at mine. It's like, well, does it have a warped blade? And looking at it, I was like, well, no, it looks pretty straight to me. But then I rolled my hand across here, and it did feel odd. It felt like there was some kind of turn in the blade, but I really couldn't see anything. And so what I did was I took a ruler and I laid the blade on the ruler, and I put it down. I was like, well, no, that looks pretty flat to me. And notice what I'm doing is I'm putting it down after where the blade is, not ignoring the tang portion. So, and it was nice and flat. And then I flipped it over, and it wasn't so flat. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, why is it rising up there, but it's flat here? And then I thought, well, let's try the other side. So I went to the other side, to see if it was because of that. But if you notice, once again, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to hold it down right at the where the clip begins, so that it's nice and flush against there. And you see there? Can you see it? Having a hard time focusing. There you go. See that? It definitely goes up. But when I flip it over, it's flat. On this side, again, you see that it definitely goes up. Definitely goes up. Flip it over, and it's flat. And so, sure enough, there is actually a twist in this blade. And I was thinking, now why would that happen? And the next thing I did is I immediately checked a bunch of other toothpicks to make sure it wasn't something that happened everywhere. And my first thought was the reason it might be twisting is because of the swedge on the knife, because the swedge actually reduces the amount of stiffness in the spine by making the spine thinner. And that might mean that the strength of the blade is lessened, and that allows the blade to warp. So I went to my other Rough Ryder that had a swedge, which was my Black Widow, and did the same thing. And as you can tell, yeah, it goes up a little bit. I flip it over, and it also goes up a little bit. Notice it's up a little bit there. Flip it over, and it's up a little bit there. Went to the other side, did the same thing, and sure enough, you flip it over, and it's up on one side. And when I flipped it over again, it rises up a little bit. And at first when I saw that, I just did it real quick over here, and I thought, oh, this is also warped. It's just not as warped as this is. But then when I kept flipping it back and forth and seeing that it actually raises up slightly on both flips, well, then there's got to be something else going on with it. And what it is the blade is actually straight, but because it's thinner here than it is back here, it is raised a little bit off of the ruler. So this blade is actually nice and straight in spite of the swedge. And I went ahead and Did the same thing for my two Colt knives, because this one has a swedge, this one did not have a swedge, and I noticed that it does the same thing that the Black Widow does. And I also checked an even older Rough Rider with no swedge and noticed that, if you can see there, it also raises a little bit regardless of which side you press down on. The blade goes up just a wee bit, and that's because the blade is actually straight. It's just thinning out, and so it is not going to lay flat simply because this part of the spine is a little higher. But because it is raising up the same amount on both sides, these blades are nice and straight. And finally, I went to my Frost anniversary knife. This is their 40th anniversary one. Their 4-inch toothpick, or medium toothpick. And it does the same thing. It raises up a little bit. Let's get it right. Raises up a little bit, regardless of which side you press down on. So this is also nice and straight. And then I started wondering, well, what the heck is going on here? Why is the classic carbon the only one that has this enormous warp in the blade? Now, the blade is still functional. It still does everything it's supposed to do. It closes into the handle all right. Yes, it is not centered, but it does close without rubbing, and the blade is sharp as the dickens, and it will cut. And it doesn't seem to interfere with how it's cutting or anything. That might be because it is warping a little bit to the left, and I'm left-handed, so maybe for a person who is right-handed, they might have more of an issue with it cutting. But the only difference between this knife and this knife and this knife, all of which have swedges, is this one uses the T10 carbon steel. And so I started wondering, is that what the problem is? And then I thought, well, I've got other knives in the classic carbon series, and one of them is a muskrat, and a muskrat has two blades that are very similar to this classic carbon toothpick. So if we open up the blade here and the blade here, you see what I'm talking about. Very similar blades. This has a swedge also. The swedge starts after the nail nick, which is good. This one has the nail nick while the swedge is running down it. We already know this one was warped, but I started wondering, is my muskrat warped? And so I put it down, and as you can see, oops, let's get it in the right spot, get all the way up there. You see that, how it's sticking up? And when I flip it over, it is suddenly flat. And we move over to the other side, and we see here it is flat. If I flip it over, it actually goes up. So the muskrat is also warped, at least on one blade. So it's got two blades, identical blades. And guess what? Similar warping going on. If I can get that to focus again, see there? It is definitely warping towards this side. Again, the blade looks straight, where what's happening is the steel is actually twisted, and it happens on both blades. On the muskrat, it happened on the toothpick as well. So with the thin tip and the swedge and everything, and however they heat treated the T10 carbon steel in these things, it has caused the blades to warp. And I figured, well, what the heck, let's try the doctor's knife also. It's got a relatively thin blade, and it's a long blade, and I felt it, and it's like, well, it doesn't feel warped, and the swedge is not nearly as long as you can see here. Can you see that? The swedge starts right there. Right at the very tip is where you finally get a swedge going on. Again, after the nail nick. But when I place the blade down, it's flat on this side. I turn it over. And once again, it goes up. So just like the classic carbon toothpick and the muskrat, the doctor's knife also warped. Now, I have not gone through the entire classic carbon series, but I've gone through these three, which have thin blades in it, and it seems like in every case the thin blades in these knives are warping. So I don't think it had anything to do specifically with the toothpick pattern. I think it had to do with the type of steel used in the classic carbon series and the way it was heat treated. So the T10 carbon steel just was not the best option for a thin bladed pocket knife. And so that and possibly the swedge on the knives contributed to the blades being a little thinner and more likely to warp. And so yeah, I have a feeling that if you've got a Rough Ryder classic carbon medium toothpick or many other Rough Ryder classic carbon knives that have thin blade stock, chances are that blade is warped. Any case, thought I would follow up with the comments that some folks made in the first part of the medium toothpick video. I hope you find this helpful. Let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with the Pious. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.